I apologize. My computer is acting up tonight. I have tried several times to get this to record without snapping out. Um, so I'm just going to go into the sermon. The sermon tonight is in 1 Corinthians 7:17 through 24. Um, the New Translation reads, verse 17, it's with Paul talking to the new believers in Corinth. It says, "You must accept whatever situation the Lord has put in you and continue as you were when God first called you. This is my rule for all the churches." Do you accept the situation that God has put you in or allowed you to be in? Do you believe that this is where God wants you? In America, we tend to subscribe to the belief that you're not in God's will unless you're prospering or receiving material or monetary blessings. But if we look at the third world countries where there's no shoes, there's no clothes, there's no water, there's no housing hardly, that would bring us to the conclusion that they're not in God's will and they're not in a right relationship with the Lord. And that is very unscriptural. Not a good conclusion. Our consumerism in America has led people to believe that if they don't have the most recent television or car or occupation, then they can't be truly happy. But God's using you where you are for a reason. He has you where you're at for a reason. But if you don't see that and you're striving for more and more and more do you think make you happy, it will lead to a general dissatisfaction or unpleasant happiness. And it'll keep you from being the man or the woman that God has created you to be. Because it will lead you to believe that you're not in a position at this point to serve God. It's easy to fall into the trap of comparing your life with someone else's. You might see that John down the road has more money than you, and you're like, well, if I had more money, then I would be able to serve God. I would have more time. And that's a lie. Your current life situation isn't where your joy should be. And it's not what makes you successful or unsuccessful. Verse 18 and 19, "Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing." In Paul's time, circumcision was a great deal. It was a special mark for the Jews as being one of God's chosen people. And it was also a mark of blessing. Granted, we live in a totally different society today, and circumcision doesn't have a play on peace and contentment in our life. We don't find that through circumcision. But to make this applicable today, peace isn't found in what you have or what you don't have, or in the possessions or positions that you have. Paul was talking about being satisfied with what we have. What we have, circumcised, uncircumcised, lots of money, cars, whatever, it doesn't mean anything to God. It doesn't mean a hill of beans to him in his eyes. It's not important. It's secondary to what really counts in life. We need to look at what happens when you begin looking for peace and contentment in other places other than where God has you planted. How easily you become focused and distracted from what the Lord really wants for your life. It all happens when we look at secondary things. 19 and 20, Paul tells us, "The important thing is to keep God's commandments. You should continue on as you were when God called you." And God's commandment is what matters. God's commandments should be the central focus of our lives. We need to focus on living a life fully committed to Jesus Christ. You were in verse 20. You're fully committed to following Jesus Christ. Paul said, "You should continue as you were when God called you. Let each one remain in the same calling." You're called to serve God and be obedient to Him right where you are. in your current job, your current city, your present financial situation, and your social situation, or whether you currently find yourself. Your primary calling in Christian life is the call to obedience. In verses 21 and 23, Paul reverted back to discussing emptiness and seeking contentment in secondary things. Were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it, but if you can be made free, rather use it. For he who is called to the Lord while slave is the Lord's freed man. Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave. You are bought at a high price. Do not become slaves of men. The slavery, the bondage that Paul was talking about, you can and you still should serve the Lord. But not many Americans understand the pain and hopelessness of slavery. Some feel as though they're slaves to the physical state, such as illnesses, or circumstances. Physical illness can be a devastating thing, and it's easy to become distracted from serving the Lord by one's pain, depression, or self-pity. But you can have the right attitude. And look past the disabilities and see that God has a plan for you and that He wants to use you. Whether it's working with somebody that has the same disability, whether it's going down the street and somebody looking at you and saying, wow, this person has all these issues, and yet God is first and foremost in their life, and they're still praising God. How can that be? What a witness that is. In verse 24, Paul concluded his message with saying, dear brothers and sisters, whatever situations you were in when you became a believer, stay there in your new relationship with God. Now you could say, well, I'm experiencing trials right now. I don't believe God called me to go through these difficulties. Well, God did not cause the trials that you're experiencing. But He does allow them to happen, either as a test or a result of disobedience or for some other reason. God allows them to happen. But He did not cause them. The thing you need to remember is that the Lord knew ahead of time what you're going to endure, what you're going through, and all that He's asking you is for obedience, and keep serving Him in the middle of it. That's all He's asked. You're not where you are by accident. If you're trusting God and you believe your steps are ordered by Him, then wherever you are right now is where you're supposed to be. Our job is not to worry about where we're planted, but our job is to bloom where we were planted. Once you're satisfied, happy, and fruitful where you are, expect God to bless you beyond belief. So I'm going to leave with this. Will you make an attempt to bloom where you're planted, faithfully serving God where you are? Or are you going to hold off serving Him until you get in the right place or situation that you feel you need to be? Will you answer His call? Or will you wait until it's too late? Let go. Let God.